have only 24 hours. The mysterious voice reached Ibrahim Traoré through an encrypted phone line. In the presidential palace of Burkina Faso, this call he received at midnight would change everything. We are gathering all African leaders. Location, secret. Time, critical. Subject, Africa's future. Traoré's heart raced. This voice belonged to Mali's President Assimi Goïta. What destiny are we deciding? Asked Traoré. The death of the CFA Franc, said Goïta in a cold voice. Our last chance to break France's final chain in Africa. But this information must not leak to anyone. Western intelligence services are watching our every move. Traoré looked at the lights of Ouagadougou from the window. Africa's monetary independence, a dream dreamed for generations but never realized. Where will we meet? At an old French base. You could call it ironic. Ibrahim Traoré noticed his hand trembling as he hung up the phone. This was not an ordinary diplomatic meeting. The CFA Franc, France's most powerful control tool over Africa, was about to be buried in history. The CFA Franc, the currency of 14 West African countries, had been the foundation of France's economic hegemony since 1945. For decades, African economists had criticized the CFA Franc system. Countries had to deposit 50% of their foreign currency reserves in the French treasury. They couldn't print money without French approval. Even their own natural resources, gold, uranium, oil, had to be sold through French companies, using a currency controlled from Paris. Traoré immediately called Security Chief Amadou Zongo. Amadou, emergency situation. I'm going to Mali tomorrow morning. But this is not an official visit. Zongo looked puzzled. Mr. President, there's no such visit in your schedule. Security protocols haven't been prepared. Because this information must not leak to anyone else, said Traoré. Only you, me, and my pilot will know. A civilian plane, fake identity, minimum security. Zongo nodded worriedly. Very risky. If something happens. If nothing happens, Africa will remain France's economic colony forever, said Traoré determinedly. That night, Traoré couldn't sleep. He walked through the palace corridors, thinking about Thomas Sankara's words, "The one who feeds you, controls you." The CFA Franc was exactly that, a feeding mechanism that kept Africa dependent on France. Early in the morning, Traoré left Ouagadougou in a small private jet, disguised as an ordinary businessman. He wore a civilian suit and carried a fake identity, Michel Caboret, a merchant dealing in mining. His usual military uniform was replaced with a simple business attire, his confident presidential demeanor masked by the nervous energy of a traveling salesman. When the plane entered Mali airspace, Traoré had question marks in his mind. Who would attend this meeting? Mali's President Goïta, of course. But who else? How many leaders were willing to risk everything for this monetary revolution? He landed at a small airport north of Bamako. Only one person was waiting for him, a big, bespectacled man wearing traditional Malian robes. "Brother Caboret," said the man with a smile. "I was waiting for you." The car journey took about 2 hours through Mali's changing landscape. They passed through villages where French colonial architecture still dominated, a constant reminder of the colonial past. Mali's northern regions were full of abandoned French military bases. After France's intervention in 2013, many bases in the Sahel region had been evacuated, leaving behind concrete monuments to foreign intervention. "Where are we going?" asked Traoré, watching the desert landscape roll by. "Old Camp Leclerc," said the driver. "Abandoned after the French withdrew in 2022. Now it's our meeting place. President Goïta chose it specifically. He said there was poetry in using a French base to plan France's economic expulsion from Africa." The old base looked like a vast area of concrete buildings in the middle of the desert. Most buildings were in ruins, their windows broken, walls scarred by sandstorms. But the central command building was usable, its thick walls and secure communication systems making it perfect for a clandestine meeting. When he entered, Traoré was surprised. Around a large table, 7 more people were sitting. He knew them all, the most powerful leaders of West Africa. The sight was both inspiring and surreal. The continent's most influential figures gathered in secret, like revolutionaries planning their next move. Mali's President Assimi Goïta stood up. "Welcome, President Traoré. Now we are all here." Traoré looked around. At the table were these leaders: Niger's President Abdourahmane Chiani, a military man with sharp eyes and careful speech; Guinea's President Mamadi Doumbouya, younger than the others but equally determined; Gabon's President Brice Oligui Nguema, representing Central Africa's interests; Chad's President Mahamat Idriss Déby, whose father had fought for African independence decades earlier; Senegal's President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, the economist who understood the CFA Franc's mathematics better than anyone, and Ivory Coast's President Alassane Ouattara, whose presence was perhaps most surprising given his country's close ties to France. "Gentlemen," said Goita, "this is a historic day. We are ending the CFA Franc system that has kept us in economic slavery for 80 years. On the table were CFA Franc banknotes, economic reports, and new currency designs. Traoré's eye caught the designs labeled AFRO, Pan-African Common Currency. The prototype banknotes featured African wildlife, traditional art, and natural resources, a stark contrast to the CFA Franc notes that still bore French symbols. "What's the plan?" asked Traoré, settling into his chair. Niger's leader Chiani leaned forward, his military background evident in his precise speech. "First, we will coordinate our exit strategy from the CFA Franc. The timing must be perfect. If one country moves too early, France can isolate it. If we move together, we're too powerful to stop." Senegal's leader Faye added, pulling out detailed economic projections, "But the price will be heavy. France will try to economically strangle us. They'll freeze assets, cancel trade deals, pressure international partners. We must be prepared for economic warfare." Chad's leader Devi spoke harshly, his voice carrying the weight of decades of frustration. "They're already strangling us. With the CFA Franc, we cannot buy our own natural resources with our own money. We have to deposit reserves in the French treasury. My country has oil, but we can't process it without French approval. How absurd is that?" Traoré nodded vigorously. "You're absolutely right. Burkina Faso has gold reserves, but we cannot sell them with CFA francs without going through French intermediaries. We're dependent on French banks for every major transaction. It's economic colonialism in its purest form." Goita put a detailed map on the table, marked with economic zones, trade routes, and resource locations. "Here's our exit strategy. Each country will simultaneously announce its exit from the CFA Franc on Tuesday at exactly 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. The announcement will be coordinated down to the minute. The new currency will be backed by our collective natural resources and gold reserves." Gabon's leader Gamer asked worriedly, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "But what about France's reaction? There could be military intervention. We've seen what they did in Ivory Coast in 2011, in Mali in 2013. They don't hesitate to use force when their economic interests are threatened." "That's exactly why coordination is so important," said Goita, his voice steady. "If we act alone, we become easy targets. France can pick us off one by one. But if 8 countries act together, representing over 100 million people and vast natural resources, France cannot stop us all. The international community won't allow mass military intervention." Traoré studied the map carefully. "Do we have confirmed support from Russia and China? Without alternative trading partners, we'll be isolated." "Yes," said Chiani, pulling out a folder of diplomatic correspondence. "Russia has committed to supporting the new currency through their central bank. They'll provide technical expertise and accept AFRO for energy transactions. China is even more enthusiastic. They're ready to make major infrastructure investments using the new currency. Both countries see this as an opportunity to reduce Western dominance in global finance." Ivory Coast's leader Ouattara, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke with the gravity of someone making a life-changing decision. "Gentlemen, there's no turning back from this decision. If we exit the CFA Franc, all our economic ties with France will be severed. My country has deeper connections to France than any other. Our elite study in Paris, our businesses depend on French credit. This will cause massive disruption." "They should be severed," said Traoré firmly. "Colonialism ended politically, but economic colonialism continues. We must now determine our own destiny. The disruption will be temporary, but the freedom will be permanent." Goita opened a large file containing hundreds of pages of economic analysis. "Here are the technical details. Each country will contribute its gold and mineral reserves to back the new currency. The initial backing will include Burkina Faso's gold, Niger's uranium, Mali's lithium, Guinea's bauxite, Gabon's oil, Chad's petroleum, Senegal's phosphates, and Ivory Coast's cocoa exports. The central bank will be established in Niamey, Niger's capital, with branch offices in each member country." The meeting intensified as they delved into specifics. Exchange rates had to be calculated, transition periods established, and contingency plans developed. Traoré was impressed by the depth of preparation. This wasn't a sudden decision but the culmination of months of secret planning. "What about our existing debts to France?" asked Guinea's Doumbouya. "That's the beauty of monetary sovereignty," replied Senegal's Faye with the satisfaction of an economist who had found the perfect solution. Our debts are denominated in CFA francs. When we establish the AFRO, we can negotiate new terms or simply declare those debts invalid due to the coercive nature of the CFA franc system. The meeting lasted 6 hours, with each detail meticulously planned. They discussed which country would announce its exit when, how the new currency would be introduced to the public, how to respond to France's inevitable retaliation, and how to maintain economic stability during the transition. In the afternoon, Traoré took a break and went outside. In the garden of the old French base, he walked among the abandoned tanks and military equipment. Rust and sand had claimed most of the machinery, but the symbolism remained powerful. Here, French soldiers had once controlled Africa under the pretext of protection. Now, this base was abandoned, but France's economic dominance had continued through subtler means. He found himself standing before a weathered plaque that read Camp Leclerc, established 1954 for the defense of French interests in West Africa. Traoré almost laughed at the irony. Today, in this very place, they were planning the end of those same French interests. In the evening hours, the meeting continued with discussion of the most critical issue: timing and coordination. The room had grown tense as the reality of their decision sank in. "We must all act at exactly the same time," emphasized Goita, checking his watch. "Tuesday, February 15th, at 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, all countries will simultaneously announce their exit from the CFA franc. Any deviation from this timeline could be catastrophic." "What about our final preparations?" asked the Senegalese leader, reviewing his notes. "We have 3 days," said Chiani. "It seems short, but it's deliberate. Extensive preparations were done months ago in secret. These 3 days are just for final positioning. The longer we wait, the greater the risk of information leaking to French intelligence." Traoré was intrigued. "You mean this has been planned for months?" Goita smiled knowingly. "President Traoré, surely you noticed the signs? The increased French diplomatic activity in recent weeks, the sudden visits from their foreign minister, the warnings about monetary stability. They're becoming aware that something is happening. Our intelligence sources in Paris confirm they're investigating unusual patterns in our economic behavior." Indeed, Traoré remembered the recent pressure from French officials. Just last month, the French ambassador had casually mentioned the importance of maintaining the CFA franc during what seemed like a routine diplomatic dinner. "If we delay any longer," continued Goita, "they will move to prevent us. Economic warfare, political pressure, possibly even direct intervention. This window of opportunity may not come again for years." "So, Tuesday it is," said Traoré with finality. "Burkina Faso is ready." One by one, the other leaders voiced their commitment. The historic decision had been made. Africa was about to experience its second independence, this time economic independence. As the meeting concluded near midnight, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and anxiety. They had just planned the most significant economic revolution in post-colonial African history. "Before we part," said Chads Devi, "we should acknowledge what we're attempting. No group of African countries has ever successfully challenged the CFA franc system. France has always found ways to maintain control, through pressure, incentives, or force. We are entering uncharted territory." "That's exactly why it must be us," replied Traoré. "We represent a new generation of African leadership. We didn't gain power through French approval or support. We understand that true independence means economic independence." The leaders would return to their countries at different times, through different routes, maintaining the secrecy that had brought them together. For security, they were all traveling with fake identities, their movements coordinated to avoid suspicion. As Traoré prepared to leave, Goita pulled him aside. "Ibrahim, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we announce on Tuesday, there's no going back. France will never forgive us, and the economic consequences will be immediate." Traoré looked back at the abandoned French base, then at his fellow African leaders. "Assimi, my grandfather worked in French colonial mines for wages paid in French francs that could only buy French goods. My father fought for political independence but remained economically enslaved. I will not pass this same burden to my children. Yes, I'm certain." As Traoré returned to Ouagadougou on the small private jet, he was lost in thought. The pilot, unaware of the cargo of revolutionary decisions he was carrying, made casual conversation about the weather and flight conditions. Traoré nodded politely while his mind raced through the implications of what they had just committed to do. Within 24 hours, one of the most important decisions in African history had been made. There was no turning back now. The die was cast, and the fate of West Africa's economic future hung in the balance. Tuesday morning arrived with unusual tension in the presidential palace of Burkina Faso. Traoré was completing his final preparations, reviewing his speech one last time. At 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, 8 country leaders would make announcements that would reverberate around the world. At exactly 2 p.m., Traoré appeared on national television, wearing his military uniform with its distinctive red beret. His voice was steady, his manner confident. "Dear people of Burkina Faso," he began, "today, we are making a historic decision that will change our economic destiny forever. We are officially exiting the CFA Franc system and transitioning to a new Pan-African currency called the AFRO." At that precise moment, similar announcements were being broadcast simultaneously across Mali, Niger, Guinea, Gabon, Chad, Senegal, and Ivory Coast. Television screens across West Africa carried the coordinated message of economic independence. France's reaction was swift and furious. Within an hour, a statement came from the Élysée Palace. "This irresponsible initiative will drag Africa into economic chaos. France will take all necessary measures to protect the economic stability of its partners and maintain the integrity of existing monetary arrangements." But it was too late. 8 countries had coordinately announced their exit from the CFA franc. The new currency AFRO would enter circulation within 3 months, backed by the collective natural resources of the participating nations. The international response was mixed but immediate. The US State Department called it a concerning development that could destabilize regional economics. The British Prime Minister warned of significant risks to economic stability. However, China welcomed the move as a sovereign decision by independent African nations, while Russia praised it as a historic step toward true independence. In the evening, Traoré monitored international reactions from his palace. Financial markets had responded with volatility. The euro dropped against major currencies as investors worried about the implications for European economic interests in Africa. Foreign Minister Koulibaly entered with updates. "Mr. President, France has recalled its ambassador and is threatening comprehensive economic sanctions. They're also pressuring our international partners to isolate us economically." Traoré smiled with satisfaction rather than concern. "We expected exactly this reaction, Minister. But we're not alone anymore. 8 countries are acting together, and we have alternative partners ready to step in." Indeed, over the following days, France's sanctions failed to create the devastating impact they intended. The coordinated nature of the exit meant that France couldn't isolate individual countries, and the promised support from Russia and China provided immediate alternatives to French economic partnerships. A week later, Traoré openly traveled to Mali for the first time since the secret meeting. The symbolism was intentional. He was no longer hiding his cooperation with fellow African leaders. In Niamey, he attended the founding ceremony of the new Pan-African Central Bank, the institution that would manage the AFRO currency. A week ago, 8 leaders gathered in a secret meeting, Traoré declared at the ceremony, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd of officials, journalists, and citizens. "In 24 hours, we changed Africa's economic destiny. Today, we formally begin a new era of African economic independence." The ceremony was broadcast live across participating countries, with millions of Africans watching their leaders sign the formal agreements establishing the AFRO currency system. At the ceremony's conclusion, Traoré spoke privately with Goita. "Assimi, did we really succeed? Sometimes it feels too good to be true." Goita laughed, but his expression remained serious. "Ibrahim, we've won the first battle, but the war for economic independence has just begun. Exiting the CFA franc was necessary but not sufficient. Now we must build genuine economic institutions, develop intra-African trade, and prove that we can manage our own monetary policy." 3 months later, when the AFRO currency officially entered circulation, Africa's economic landscape had transformed dramatically. The new banknotes featured African wildlife, traditional art, and symbols of natural resources rather than colonial imagery. More importantly, the participating countries had gained control over their monetary policy for the first time in decades. Traoré held one of the first AFRO banknotes in his office, examining the image of an African elephant alongside depictions of gold mines and solar panels, symbols of both Africa's natural heritage and its technological future. France's 80-year monetary hegemony over West Africa had officially ended. The implications rippled far beyond the 8 participating countries, inspiring discussions of monetary independence across the continent. In his palace in Ouagadougou, Traoré looked at Thomas Sankara's portrait with deep satisfaction. "We did it, Thomas," he whispered. "We finally realized your dream of economic independence." 6 months after the secret meeting, Africa's economic independence movement had inspired similar initiatives across the continent. The East African community began serious discussions about their own common currency, while Southern African nations explored alternatives to their dependence on the South African rand. On Traoré's desk sat a framed photograph from that historic meeting, 8 leaders around a table in an abandoned French military base, their faces serious with the weight of the decision they were making. Under the photo, in Traoré's handwriting, was inscribed, "The 24 hours that changed Africa's destiny. February 12 to 13, 2024, Africa's Economic Independence Day." The secret meeting had become the stuff of legend, inspiring books, documentaries, and academic studies about successful economic decolonization. Economists worldwide studied the AFRO currency as a model for how developing nations could break free from post-colonial monetary arrangements. Traoré remembered that midnight phone call that started it all. "You have only 24 hours, Goita had said with urgent secrecy. Those 24 hours had indeed changed everything, not just for the 8 countries involved, but for the entire continent's understanding of what was possible when African leaders acted with unity and determination. The death of the CFA Franc represented the severing of France's last major chain binding Africa to its colonial past. African countries were finally beginning to achieve the economic independence that had eluded them for decades after political independence. History would record that clandestine meeting as Africa's second independence movement, the moment when African leaders finally broke free from the economic structures that had kept their nations dependent on former colonial powers. And it all began with a mysterious phone call at midnight, leading to 24 hours that changed the destiny of an entire continent.